And so let's get started. Just want to double check, can everyone see the presentation screen before I actually start? All right. Yep. Sounds good. All right. So, hey guys, I'm David. This presentation is going to be all about landing your first big tech internship. And because I know it's really weird when recruiters come to campus and they talk about how nice it is to work for a company, but they never actually tell you how to work at the certain company, right? And as someone who's done a crap ton of interviews and recently landed their dream job, I want to help some of you guys out because I know how hard it can be and I know the struggle. So in terms of background, this is my background. And I just wanted to add some credibility because I know personally I don't want to be listening to someone that I don't think has experience. And so this is my occupation background. And if we're talking about places that I've interviewed, these are all the places that I have interviewed at. And I believe there could be better approaches for you that tackles interview prep and interviews in a different sense. However, I'm going to try to show you guys what worked for me. Okay. So I want to start off by asking, what is big tech? And it's a rhetorical question, but big tech isn't only FANG level companies like Facebook, Apple, Amazon, Microsoft, and Google, things like that. But big tech is basically any tech company that is a household or workplace name. So things like DoorDash, Pinterest, Asana, Okta are all big tech companies. And the best thing about these big tech companies is that they all have the same interview process, plus or minus a couple of companies that are a little weird. So this presentation will be useful for basically almost every tech company you apply to, even places in the public sector. So I wanted to create a poll here, and okay, this is too complicated, I lied. So basically, a lot of people, they want to either work at startups or big tech or public sector, and they don't know really why they should work in big tech if they enjoy startups or the public sector, right? After all, you're not really going for the free food and the perks that they provide. And especially as an intern, big tech offers a huge amount of concrete advantages you should consider over startups and public sector work. And I believe the first advantage is that big tech has something called name recognition. Just like when you buy like some hypebeast brand, you have that name recognition. When you work for big tech, it allows you to put the company name on your resume. And as a recruiter, it shows me that you're capable of working at that big tech company and you have the transferable skills to work at my company. And it also shows that you went through a competitive recruiting process already. So as a recruiter, you are given a bonus when a candidate you selected gets hired, right? Which is kind of crazy, but this gives the recruiters more reason to select you if you worked in big tech before. So in essence, in the future, you'll be able to secure more interviews and therefore have more options in the future. So for example, if you, at the end of the day, if you don't like working in big tech and you rather work in startups, this just gives you more options to interview at more startups and opens more doors for you. Okay. And the second reason, I kind of leaked it before, is pay. It seems quite superficial to put pay there and a little bit materialistic, you would say, but pay is a lot of the reasons why people select certain jobs. And I remember back in the day when we were at uOttaHack co-op class, they told us that the mean salary for suite co-ops was like $23 an hour Canadian. And that is quite a bit, I would say, for a 19 or 20-year-old to be making. But I want to let you guys know that big tech companies often pay triple or even double the amount that the mean salary at uOttaHack. And I'm just going to ask you guys a question. You feel free to answer in chat. I want to ask you guys, how much do you think a Lyft intern gets paid? Someone who works at Lyft. 60, 70. Wow, you guys are pretty close, honestly. I didn't think. So someone makes around 54 USD an hour. And if you're talking about pay, that is triple what the mean salary of a uOttaHack co-op student makes, right? Which is pretty freaking insane in my opinion. I don't think anyone that is 20 should be making that amount of ridiculous money, but it's normal in big tech, right? Loans, you can potentially pay them really quickly if you work at these big tech companies. And the final reason you should work in big tech is impact, right? When you work at these big tech companies, you benefit more people, and you'll be working on something bigger than yourself, which is pretty special. I know personally, I'm really excited to work at Riot Games because I'll be affecting over 115 million League of Legends players, which feels to me extremely rewarding. It's a good idea to explain the meat of the presentation, right? And is how to work in big tech, right? So working in big tech is generally simple, right? It's only a two-step process. You get selected and then you have to nail the interview. But just because it's simple doesn't mean it's easy. And we'll get into that a little later, right? So there are multiple ways to get selected. Via referral, you can use LinkedIn connections or generic applications. But in every situation where you want to get selected, you have to be using a solid resume. Right? And I'm no expert on solid resumes. If you want really good expertise on resume review, you should go to a resume roast at this hackathon. But I'm just going to show you guys what worked for me, okay? And what worked for me is an approach that Google recruiters used, which is called the XYZ formula. And basically, what you want to do in the XYZ formula is that you want to explain something you've accomplished as measured by Y by doing Z. Now, it doesn't have to be that exact format, but at the end of the day, you want to accomplish something and put it in your point. You want to measure something by a metric. For example, here it's 1 million Nagios metrics. And you want to have, which is developing a CSV parser. Right. So the next biggest thing you need, if you other than work experience, is projects. And I apologize for the low quality image, but it is what it is. So projects are very important because it shows your independence and you can learn by yourself. And one of the best things about SWE is that you have a personal device many people use, many professional engineers use, which is your laptop. You know, Airbnb engineers use your laptop. People at Google use laptops, and you can be using this laptop to make projects and nothing's really stopping you, right? So it's unlike chemical engineering where you have to go to the lab to do projects. SWE, you can basically do your project out of your own home, right? And if you make a project and you don't really like it, and you may never like any projects you build, well, the worst case scenario, if you don't like your project, is that you learn something new, you learn new methods, and you improve your skills in development. But the best case scenario is that you show recruiters that you can take initiative and you're an independent learner. Okay, so to recap the resume section, you need to use the XYZ formula and you need to have projects on your resume. And I think once switching my resume to this XYZ formula, I felt like my interview success rate went way up. I mean, my interview selection rate went way up. So let's now move on to the interview process. So if you guys have done interviews before, you probably know the interview process. But generally speaking, you do a coding assessment on Codility or HackerRank. And I never really used any other platforms. You do multiple whiteboarding interviews, which is basically they ask you a coding question and then they try to solve it on a whiteboard. Then you do a culture fit. And I put Shopify there because they're known to have a progressive culture fit interview. And finally, if you succeed in every single step, you get a job. Okay. And if you think this process is kind of lengthy and crazy, you're probably right. This process is crazy because it takes several months, and it took me 2 years of studying to get where I am today. And I don't think there's any other industry that has such rigorous hiring process. But if you think about it in more of a big picture state, it kind of makes sense. You know, SWE is a huge industry with multiple different companies, and multiple people need SWEs to operate their company. And these big big tech companies are cream of the crop, and this is how they reduce the pool efficiently. So for example, the Google interview process is a snapshot, which is your coding assessment. Then you do 2 whiteboarding phone screens, and then you do host matching. And then if you pass all of that, you get your job. Okay, so now you know the process. Let's talk about acing the interview. So there are a lot of resources online, right? Like HackerRank, Hacker by the Noon, Geeks for Geeks. But the 2 resources and your Bibles that worked for me are Cracking the Coding Interview and LeetCode. Cracking the Coding Interview has a lot of programming questions, but I used them more effectively for the insight that it gave on how you should actually conduct the interview. It told you what you should say, what your approach should be, and things like that. But the LeetCode is just basically a huge database of interview questions and answers. And I've literally had interview questions come right out of LeetCode. So now you need a strategy. You know your Bibles, and now you need a strategy to ace your interview. If you're studying by yourself, this is a good approach. You go through each LeetCode topic, and you grind the topic until you can do a medium in 30 minutes consistently. So a medium in each topic for 30 minutes consistently, while giving more attention to the topics you struggle at. I say medium questions because generally speaking, this is what big tech companies ask for their interns. And I say for 30 minutes because interviews are usually 45 minutes and you need 15 minutes to explain your approach and your runtime. So just a little bit of context. Before my Okta interview, I had around 200 questions solved. And these are some of my friends down here. One of my friends did 175. He works at big tech, and another one at 104, and he works at big tech as well. However, studying by yourself pales into comparison in the most effective way you can study. And in my opinion, the most effective way you can study is mock interviews. This is the single most important interview prep you can ever do, right? Personally, I've done around 50 or so in a 3-month span in preparation for Riot Games and in preparation for Okta. So in generally speaking, what you do is you get a buddy, preferably around your skill level, so you both benefit from the mock interview. And before your interview, you pick a LeetCode problem you're familiar with. You also want to open up a 90-minute time slot since they're 45 minutes each. So as a candidate, well, as a mock candidate, you're going to be solving the question, of course. And the general flowchart goes as follows. You discuss your approach, you ask questions to remove ambiguity, then you write your code while explaining your thought process aloud, and then you discuss runtime and memory complexity. As an interviewer, you should be nudging the interview in the correct direction and helping them out when they get lost, just like a real interview would. And one of the most important things about these interviews is that it puts you in the shoes of the actual interviewer. Not only that you get practice as a candidate, but putting yourself in the shoes as an interviewer, it makes it easier to formulate an approach and explain your thought process more effectively because you know what to expect from a candidate, or you know what you want to get out of a candidate, basically. So as you do more and more mock interviews and more LeetCode questions, and you keep on doing preparation, you'll start to improve and you'll start to have fun, right? It's kind of, I always like to equate it to the feeling when you solve a difficult physics or calculus problem and you feel that sense of achievement, you're like, or that sense of relief, you're like, oh, hell yeah, I got it right. And you're just like super happy. But what you'll notice is that each question you do is linked to another question. And each question is linked to a pattern, and each pattern are linked to each other, okay? And you'll eventually realize that these LeetCode problems are trivial and they just become simple pattern recognition. For example, let's take number of islands, for example. Number of islands is, if you ever done interview prep before, number of islands is probably one of the most frequently asked interview question. It's basically you trying to find the number of islands in a 2D grid where ones are land and zero is water. So basically for number of islands, you use the graph traversal algorithm. But you know what else uses graph traversal algorithms? Pacific Atlantic water flow uses graph traversal algorithms, and so does valid night moves. And so does probably around 50 other questions on LeetCode. So by mastering number of islands, you can solve a large portion of graph traversal problems. So you know how to get selected. You know how to ace the interview. But none of that matters, right? Unless you have step 0, right? After all, arrays start at 0. And no one really talks about, you can find some different approaches online on how to get selected and how to ace the interview, but no one online really talks about the correct mindset you need to really ace the interview. And this is why I'm going to be spending a larger portion of this presentation on the correct mindset. So I want to ask the chat, have you applied to your dream internship yet? So that means going through the online application. I'm just wondering if anyone has even started to apply for the dream internship. No. Due to mentally no. Okay, so I see a lot of yeses and I see a lot of nos. And those who say yes, that is good because you have step 0. And those who say no, there's nothing really stopping you from applying. I just want to say this, there's nothing really stopping you from applying. It literally only takes 15 minutes out of your day to apply. And I bet some people that I know, literally the recruiter has misclicked their name and they got an interview. So you could get lucky like that and you can actually just get an interview by a misclick. So you should apply ASAP, because I'm in 4th year now and I wish I applied in 1st year, because I didn't work in big tech a lot, but I was also scared in 1st year and 2nd year. And you should just apply, because there's no real disadvantage for applying. It just takes like max 30 minutes out of your day. Okay, so I want to actually just move back to the presentation. So you need the correct mindset, right? And so I'm going to give you an example. Michael Phelps is considered the greatest of all time swimmer. And do you guys think he waits 2 weeks before the Olympics to train? Right? Obviously not, right? He trains continuously because it's his job, right? If he only trains 2 weeks before the Olympics, he wouldn't have as many gold medals as he does, and he wouldn't be the GOAT, right? So I'm not saying you guys have to be Michael Phelps, but when you're a SWE, and especially when you're a SWE student, you have to be doing projects continuously, working on your resume continuously, and working on interview prep continuously. Right? This is no longer school. Right? In school, you can study 2 days before your exam. You get a 60, you get a 70, you just forget about it. Right? But when you're studying for interviews, it's literally your job. There's no percentage, there's no 60, 50, 40%. You either do well or you don't. And if you do well, you fail. And if you don't do well, if you do well, you get the job. If you fail, you don't get the job. Sorry. Right? So I guess the correct mindset is a little bit vague, but the correct mindset is to think as interview prep as part of your job, right? You should never wait until an interview to continuously to train. You should be training continuously, like almost every day. Okay. So I'm gonna now continue to a little bit of anecdotes. And while I speak about these anecdotes, I want you guys to keep in mind this quote. It's opportunities present themselves to those who have prepared. And I think this quote is super applicable to the interview prep. So that's why I left it on the screen. So I'm going to talk about the Homie Maulik. That's him. You saw the picture before in one of the and that's actually at our first interview prep session, right? So the story is that my buddy Maulik caught word I was having these interview prep sessions in CRX. And then we did one together in January 2020, right? And when I do interview prep sessions, I never did one with Maulik before, right? And I didn't know his skill level, so I gave him two-sum. And then I selected 2 questions, which was two-sum, the easiest question on LeetCode, literally the first question that was ever registered. And I gave him a medium question that it was relatively challenging in my opinion, right? So he couldn't even do two-sum, right? Look at the upvote to dislike ratio. That's insane. That it's literally the easiest question on two-sum, and he couldn't do it. But that doesn't mean he stopped trying. He trained and he trained, and unfortunately, he wasn't good enough in summer 2020. Even though he applied to 300 jobs, he didn't get anything. He was discouraged, and I think everyone will be discouraged in this situation. But at the end of the day, you shouldn't be discouraged, because the work you will do now will pay off in the future, right? It goes back to that quote: opportunities present themselves to those who are prepared, right? So Maulik prepared that summer. He prepared so much, and Maulik, I think he went like extra ham, because he's the only person that I know that used a service called Pramp, which is basically you do mock interviews with strangers on the internet. So he went extra ham. So he prepared in that summer. He didn't have a job. And you know what? This fall, opportunity presented itself, right? He got a call from Amazon and he took the interview, and now he's working there this summer, right? I don't want to speak for Maulik. I know he's a good guy. I'm really proud of him, but I can say personally, without a doubt, if he didn't prepare continuously, he wouldn't have got that job at Amazon. Like if he gave up and didn't prepare after getting rejected tons of times, he definitely wouldn't have got the job at Amazon, right? And I know now I'm going to talk about a little bit about myself, but first I want to talk about how the stigma around these big tech companies. And I feel like a lot of people now, I used to feel like people who work at these places are held to extremely high regard, right? I used to think that everyone who works at Google, they work at Uber, they go to a top school, they're super, super smart, and they're gifted. They're gifted coders, right? I even remember a time where I was blaming my school choice, uOttaHack, and my God-given talent as a SWE, like my mediocre talent as a SWE, right? But let me tell you guys that this is a myth. You don't really have to be smart. You don't have to go to a top school. And don't get me wrong, these things definitely help you, but you don't need to have them. And to prove to you guys, I'm just going to be extremely, extremely honest, right? So we talked about schools, right? And you don't have to go to an elite school. And I want to show you guys that this is McLean's top engineering programs in Canada, the McLean's ranking. And in red is a school I go to. I'm not saying that uOttaHack is like a trash school, because I actually really love going to uOttaHack. But second last on a reputations ranking is not really an advantage, I would say. Right? And now if we're talking about you have to be smart, I got a C+ in data structures and algorithms, which is basically the basis of interview prep. If you don't know data and structures and algorithms, how are you supposed to do interview prep? And I got a C+ in that. I got a C in intro to software engineering. And software engineering is literally in the title of that course, right? And I got a C in that course, right? And that's a really great thing. I'm not saying that I got a C is a great thing, but that's one of the great things, is that you could have some William Lin type dude who can do their Google Kickstart in 30 minutes and can ace their interview and without preparation in one go. So that's William Lin. And you have someone like me who has to prepare 2 years to get to even pass their first interview. And we can both work in big tech, and we can both put it on our resume. And on paper, we have the same experience, even though I would say objectively, William Lin is a superior coder to me, right? So you don't have to be smart. You don't have to go to a good school, but if you think you can do it without putting in work, you're mistaken, right? If you think you can do it without rejection, you're clearly mistaken. So in my 2020 job search, I applied to, let's say, around 400 companies. This is for summer 2020. And these companies are all over the US, some even in Australia and some in Canada. And literally I went through a list of all companies that were hiring interns and I applied to every single one. And I got rejected by 247. And like I would say 120 or so, they didn't even want to take the time to send me a rejection letter. Right? And in 2021, I was rejected by 117 companies. And I failed 15 assessments and interviews, right? And if we're talking about local companies, I really wanted to work at Shopify the first 2 years of my university. And I kind of do now still, but I got rejected 10 times by Shopify. That is literally every season since I've been to university. So in first year, I applied for winter, summer, and fall. In second year, I did the same thing, and I did the same thing up until third year. And I got rejected every single time. I've done the Google interview 3 times. I did the Amazon interview twice. And before I got into host matching, I failed those interviews, right? So I failed Big 4 interviews 5 times. And even though I'm in a host matching, I really doubt I'm going to get past this stage. So if you look objectively at my work experience throughout my university tenure, you'll think I'll have pretty good work experience, right? I worked at GSI and these great companies. But when you've looked at someone's LinkedIn or work experience or their resume, you don't get to see what the work they've put in. And this is really important because if you look objectively at the work experience, you may get discouraged. But if you do a deep dive on their interview prep and the work they put in, it shows a whole different story, right? So this is like a kind of like a compilation, a gallery of some of the examples of the sacrifices I had to make and the struggle I went through. And so the sacrifice I had to make is that I had to give up a lot of things, like some sleep at one point, going out with friends weekly. I used to do that a lot. And there's a point in time where I literally almost threw out my computer just to get more interview prep in and stop playing video games. Right. And there was a point of time where I was even waking up at 5:30 a.m. to do interview prep before going to work. And now I'm not saying losing your sleep is a good idea, but in my opinion, that's the mindset you kind of need. You kind of need to have that mindset where you have to sacrifice something to get where you want to be. Right. So you see the pictures here, that's me. Someone tried to film me, I don't know why, but that was me coding on a whiteboard. And I've done mock interviews with over like 30 people and things like that, right? So getting a spot where I secured my dream internship was a real journey, right? It took me 2 years of interview prep, 2 years of training continuously, right? But it paid off and I got my dream internship, okay? So that is basically the end of my presentation, but I want to give you guys a recap. Step 0 is having the correct mindset and treating training as part of your job, right? Like the Michael Phelps example. If you want to get to where you are, you have to keep training continuously or you're not going to get there. Step 1 is getting selected via the XYZ formula on your resume and having projects on there, right? You guys should just start projects, right? Like this hackathon is a great thing because you get to start your project and you get to put it on your resume. Step 2 is doing mock interviews and leak code questions religiously, right? But step 1 and step 2, they don't matter unless you have the correct mindset, which is step 0. And from this presentation, I hope you know now you don't have to be incredibly smart. You don't have to go to a great school and you don't have to be a genius coder like William Lin, right? I'm saying is if I can get my dream tech internship, I think others can too, because I don't want to say like I'm stupid, but I think there are definitely other talented coders that are more talented than I am. right? So I hope this presentation was useful. I want you guys to, if you learned anything from this presentation, I want you guys to know that you have to keep preparing and you have to keep training, and you have to remember that opportunities present themselves to those who have prepared, because that is a really good quote. Okay. And just apply. I saw before that this guy didn't apply in the chat. Just apply, dude. It literally takes 15 minutes out of your day to apply. Okay. And if you have any questions, feel free to ask in the chat. I'll be down to answer some.